Welcome to the Origins Podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Krauss. I'm extremely excited about this episode with Jordan Peterson.
I know JP's a
Jordan and
marshmallow,
I
so usually
did
I
an episode
don't
of
roll
his
too much
podcast
thunder
some
in
time
here
ago,
unless he
during which he
gets me
peppered
going.
with questions. And we decided we'd do a
Some
second
prime minister or
podcast where I
something said they
could
walk
return
in
the
here
favor
and
for
think
the
they
most part.
psychologists. They don't know
And
Carl
in this
Sagan.
discussion that we had, I was able to probe a lot of aspects that I've tried to understand about Jordan's writing and his thinking, some of which I found difficult to appreciate. And we talked about his own background as interested in becoming a psychologist and also studies in addiction.
Well,
and
like I said,
personality.
memetics is
Then we moved
life's
to
a
a
meme
topic that
kind
we
of
both
thing, so you
decided we
equip
wanted to
somebody with the
focus on,
right
which is
kind of
that in
diagrams,
some
some
sense the
basic
nature of
ideas of
meaning
what the stuff you need to look
based
like.
on his
Help
book
them with
Maps
one or
of
two
Meaning.
of them.
And I
Like, this
wanted
could
to
be
parse
a
some of the
brown
ideas
ledger
that
note. You were
he talks
picking
about
up
there a little
facts
more
on
carefully, which
JP,
we
put it
did,
in the ledger
and
for the
talked about things
timeline.
from existential
Confronting
threats to
value,
values
meaning,
and what you mean
and
by
more
values, to the nature
being the
of
heading
narrative
for the timeline
and life
based
as
on
storytelling.
its date when I
It was a
registered it.
wide-ranging discussion,
Coming
including
into
also
set, it
discussing
might
such things
change
as how to do
the
research
the
in
mass
time
value
era
on the spin,
PC
give you better
commandments that
comprehension
make
of the
that
early
research
event in
I
itself,
particularly enjoyed the
first contact,
discussion, and I think many of you who might have listened
where
to Jordan before will find a
superposition
new side of Jordan here,
of
as we tried to
quantum
explore,
entanglement of those two
in depth
positions
the ideas
probably
behind
always
what
had
someone
inertial
talks about
mass
and
to
where
the
he's coming from.
entropy state of the
So,
Compton
I
scattering.
hope you enjoy this as
on.
much as I did. For those of you who are watching
Sometimes
this
they just
on
come off like some of the
YouTube,
regular algorithms,
please,
but there's no basic
consider
function to
subscribing to our
A
YouTube
to
channel,
X
because most
that
of the people
does
who
it
watch
better
this
than
YouTube
A
actually
to
don't
X
subscribe.
for
It helps us,
traditional
but it also
values.
helps you because you can get notices
Code
of
can be
upcoming
A to B on a
podcasts
crypto,
as
and
well.
design can
And
be
as you
meta.
may know,
But most
the
times,
podcast is
psychologically,
produced by the
if
Origins
you're
Project
messing around too
Foundation,
much
which is a
on
non-profit
some of these
foundation
strings that are
designed
real,
to encourage
it's
communication about
because you were
science and
messing
important
around.
ideas.
These vibrate in the wrong
So if
way.
you want to support the podcast in another way, please
The way
consider
things
becoming
should
a
move,
subscriber
if
on
you graph
Patreon,
them out.
which
If you
will
look to the
support
parallel and
foundation
say, just on
directly.
that
And you'll
independent
also be able to
system,
see,
it gives it
and
some
watch
meaning.
all of the
You're
episodes
in an
without
area
any,
of somebody that
advertisements as well.
is
Either way, I hope you enjoy the podcast, and I hope you enjoy in particular this
at a
podcast
point. It
with
was
Jordan
being
Peterson.
gold for medical
Well, welcome,
treatments
Jordan.
on
It's great to have you now on my podcast after I was on
heart
yours.
and
It's
brain
really great to have a chance
treatments
to
of
talk to you
different
again. Well, thank you. I'm really looking
chemical
forward to
bonds
it.
of the gold
And
3
I hope you
ion
are.
in
I
solution.
should
So
say
they
that this is perhaps
nitric acid it,
been, for
cleaned
me,
it, put it in
one of the most
a
difficult
powder or liquid
and
solution,
exasperating,
and
infuriating preparations
Pepto-Bismol
podcasts
for the
I've had to do.
stomach.
I have enough
you know, the
notes
value
here
on
for about
that
21
number
hours.
comes up weird,
We
but
won't go more than 2, but I know
what
I have
locally
a lot because
has it
there's so much to parse.
by proportion.
And,
so
what
the
was- what
made
chemist
it
pull
difficult
out
and
caffeine
exasperating?
in
Well,
coffee.
It's kind of a compliment.
It is, and
Ooh,
well,
okay.
there's, you know, I want to give a preface because I want to be in full disclosure about how I've come to understand you both before and after our last meeting. I'm often certain. I know for a long time when I've read you that I'm not sure I understand what you're saying just in the reading. I've had a hard time understanding what you're saying, or at least whether it's me or
benefits
the
about it is you
the
gotta
work.
click,
And
click, and that's what they want to
before I
buy
met
with
you,
it too.
there's a line
Slam
from
it
the Dick
down
Van
on the
Dyke
table
Show
if
from
they
Carl
need
Reiner
a big heavy hand
that I always
with it, but
remember
at the same
where
time
he
be the
said, "What on the
sharpest guy.
surface seems vague is in
That's-
reality meaningless."
Subtly
And-
slit your
and
throat,
I-
the
and I-
reaper on a
and then when I
cemetery bill.
read a lot of the stuff,
and
I thought, well, this
look,
is
in
vague.
the
I don't
local right now,
exactly
it's
know
one's
where it's
zero-
coming from.
the-
And as I
Whether
read
it
you,
be
and now
this
I've been reading
version
in
of the
preparation for
mill
this, I've been
skid
reading you
steer
in depth.
safety
I've read you,
checklist
I've read you before.
over at doing them
I
one of those
alternate
models.
between this
Is
sense
this
of
the right
some
one?
things
No,
I think
because
are
I
just
chose not to get too
clearly
in depth
true,
with just the skid
but they
steer.
kind of seem like truisms. Like I often wonder whether when my first reaction to 12 Rules for
There'll
Life
be a
was,
whole Carl
maybe it
Sagan
should be
universe
12
of the
pages, and
300
Ten
IQ
Commandments
kid
was one tablet.
breaking down the trolley car.
And whether one,
San
it's a long
Francisco
book, and
being
you
part of the
you know,
build on
you write
ZBrush.
and you write,
What those
you write
kids
a lot.
need.
It's just the property of the way you write.
Just handy if you're going to get the boat with
and,
me. Like with
and
the
then
Senate in here.
Sometimes there were allusions and discussions that I
Who might argue?
really
Joe?
couldn't comprehend
Gacko?
or I thought were vague. Sometimes there were insights,
13.
and there are insights that seem incredibly deep and
Well, the
profound.
grimoire is
and
important, and it's always
true
things
that
like
you're reaching
Solomon's
towards,
challenge
and I find them
coins for the
fascinating.
type of math
sometimes there are
equations I
statements
might
that I
toss
disagree
you.
with
But that's
completely.
radical thinking
So
about
I
it. Break a
alternate
lot of
between
rules.
all of that, and it's been and it's a fascinating way to go. I was
Use
naturally
demons and mark your
skeptical
feet.
before
You know,
I
it's like
before
that
we had our
spook
dialogue.
stuff.
I
Somebody
want to
using a
tell you
skeptical
screwdriver with a
physicist?
nickel
Yeah.
cross
Really?
core.
Exactly. But I was skeptical of you
are you
because
doing?
I couldn't understand
I'm
a lot of it,
lucky none of that.
there were lots of reasons, but primarily it was that Carl Reiner quote that kept me in the back of my head. But after our last dialogue,
Some of them are.
I
You
totally
can't graph
changed my view
everything.
because
Yeah, I mean,
your questions were deep and interesting and curious. And
well,
what I
the
became
game
convinced
is
of
politically
was that you were a man
thinking
who
about it. You know, back
seriously
to Joe
wants to
Rogan, one of
understand
the case studies
the
he
world
brought out
and
for
engage
Bernoulli.
in conversation. And it switched.
I love
and
the
my
undertone
respect for
because
you
it
just went through
corners
the roof as a
and
result, because
polarizes
that
square ways
conversation
on things.
demonstrated
But
to me that
he brought
you were
out the
earnest
guy with the
and serious
metaverse,
in your
pulling
desire
in
to
there
understand the
everybody's
world. And then
dark
I
web
decided to
with
look
some
at what you wrote
bullshit at the
in a
high
different
level,
way and
high
try and
table,
seriously
some
understand
greed,
it.
lust,
So that's,
envy,
I
pride,
hadn't
whatever.
expected
bit 'em.
that, and the strong connection
lots of
that I
stories,
do
standard
feel
models, how to play
as
the
an
math, or
academic
at
and
least
as a
set it
human
up.
being towards you, which
I
is
just
a
got done with
wonderful
MIT
thing, 'cause
classes on
I love being
optimization. Oh
wrong,
no,
or at least I love having my viewpoints change.
binary
And they
trees.
certainly did after our discussion.
Fun,
So I
fun.
wanted to, in full disclosure, I wanted to say I came into our first discussion as a complete skeptic, and more so maybe even
When you go OP
suspicious.
with the camera
then,
overhead, you
and
have
then,
to have some
then it changed.
NCOs trained
But,
across
no,
the
I'm
boards
very
that
glad
are
to hear
willing
that.
to
And-
do
and it
that
is good to-
because
it is good
it's
to
a
be
long
wrong and
game,
find
high
that out.
demand,
Unless everything in
super
your
hard
life is so
procedures.
perfect that it's
Most of
clear
it's
that you
going to
know
have to go
everything.
through by JP on
And,
the ethics
you know,
committee and the winning
yeah,
judge.
yeah.
Like, let them have it. Anything
Well,
comes up inside of there
now,
to
the
just
other
a
thing I
regular
wanna
day,
do,
you should be able to
I
delete
want to give you a chance to ask
before
some
it's
questions too,
cleaned,
because I enjoy your
because it
questions,
would
and I
mass
know
out on
in some of our
processors.
email dialogues back and forth between, I know there's some things you've been reading that you.
I believe in
wanna-
human
about
nature. If you
cosmology
watch
that you wanna talk
Fox,
about. So I'll give you a chance to ask some of those after.
I'm sure Chinese
in the
news
latter
and
part,
Russian
or
news
maybe
too.
if there's a relevant point in the middle, you can bring it up.
Mayhem
And feel
out
free
there.
to ask the question in the middle, as
Okay.
far as I'm concerned. I know the things about fine tuning and
Yeah.
and a universe before our universe. There's a number of things. Also, I want to, for
Who's
the
your case study
listeners, I want to
right
preface
now?
this because
Can I bring him
what-
out here without
what we
him tripping the
discussed, you asked
sequence
me
on
really
it? Breaking the rules? You got to break the rules
The
without
thing you
breaking
want
the
to
rules.
discuss with me was mostly maps of meaning.
JP, your
And
guy.
that's
well,
what
would-
I've
well,
now
what would
focused
JP
on.
need
And in
to shift?
particular,
What would you
what you suggested,
have?
I really parsed carefully, was from the new book, Beyond Order, Rule 11. And so that's what I've done, just so you're aware. I've tried to so the discussion I want to have, and you've written a lot of different
That's
things,
good phase.
will be primarily about those things, but of course it'll overlap
Well,
with
back to
other
the trolley
other
car
things, but
300
that's where
IQ set.
the
You know, there's
discussion's
some.
gonna focus on.
When you're
And
looking
can
at
you
the
remind
main
me what
line,
Rule 11 was?
the-
I'm having
well,
some
the
memory
equation
trouble.
itself
So
will deal
That's
with
all right. I mean, I never remember what I
electromagnetism,
write
gravity,
today after I do
strong
either.
force,
And the
weak
thing
force,
is about Rule
for
11,
what happens in
like
the
many
pipes,
things
clean
when I
schematics.
read you, is
But
that
the same
the
chain
title of
flipping
Rule 11,
internal to
it
get
only
it to
by
run
the
around
end
a
of it,
5
I
or
kind of
50
vaguely
foot ring
understood
in
where the title
Fermilab.
came from. Rule 11
Is
really seems to
that
me to be a
box.
summary
Air comes in,
of
air
maps
comes
of meaning,
out. That
in fact,
takes
but
care of
it's do not
groceries,
allow yourself to
multi-world, and
become
universe.
resentful,
Day night
deceitful,
comes
or
around.
arrogant.
Oh, yes.
Then their house.
And really that,
And so you get them schematic
and
in their
those,
house.
and as
like
you, and as
literally.
I now understanding
The meta,
from having read you, that the sources of
the
those
skill,
of those
wait,
three
well,
ills
not an
are really
Oculus
related
in this
to the
form.
sources of the
At the
problems
program
of
level,
dealing
is
with
probably
the,
going to give you a big return to
the
pull
meaning,
over.
the map of meaning, in a sense. And so that's
Yes.
why it was a good place, I think, for you to direct me to.
Yes, I
The
remember why
house
now.
build
Yep.
on game
Okay.
theory.
Um,
It's just a type
but
of move,
before-
help you build
before
some
we
AI
get
on
to
logic,
those,
and
because
some
it is
basic
an origins
programming,
podcast,
helps you move
I
some
want to go
stuff
into your
around, do the
origins because,
hardscape, and
I know some of the
and,
things, but I
you
have
know,
some
move
questions about
into
this. So,
that
you know, I
type of
know you're very
structure.
interested. In fact, in some sense,
Well,
in my mind,
whatever's
origins
going on
mean
outside is kind of
I mean,
relative to
maps
all
of
this
meaning is really about
inverted,
the origins
you
of
know,
the
what else
psyche
you
in some
pulling in,
sense. But I want to
fractalizing.
understand the origins of your
However,
psyche
we want to.
first. So
Again,
that's
that's
where I
my
want to go.
boot camp in there. It's a
Born
factory. It's
in
whatever's
Edmonton?
psychology camp.
Yes.
Okay. And
You're
what-
pushing to that piece. So, you know,
what-
Infinite Series
what
says,
influence did-
you know,
what did your
let's
parents
put
do?
a arbitrary
My dad
number
was
of
a
chess
teacher.
pieces down.
of what?
And number
And my
theory.
mother was a nurse, trained as a nurse, and then
Put
she
that
worked
many
as a
down.
librarian.
But this
in-
game is pretty
that was mostly
specific
her career,
to,
was a
again,
librarian at the
the
local college.
7-8 piece checkmate where
my
black
dad
kills
was a
you.
teacher for most of
But
the
you're
time I
dumb
was
and
at
you
home.
don't know it, and this
A
one's
high school
the
teacher
same
or
thing,
a-
and he's
or
going
a-
to play
No,
that.
junior
because,
high teacher,
well,
or
across the
elementary
board,
school teacher, grade
first
6. He was the
contact,
vice principal of our
but
local
you don't
elementary
know.
school.
They
and
could
he
be on
taught me when I
Metaverse,
was
but
in grade
that's just
6,
the
some classes.
Oh, that must have
Six.
been an interesting experience himself.
445
STP
both
taking
for
down
good and not
Zuckerberg's
good.
Medi-Cal.
Yeah, I know.
Sucking it dry.
I can imagine it's difficult. I once taught my daughter took a summer course in physics, and I taught her, and it was really fascinating for me because I saw a very different side of her in class. She was very different as a student than she was as a daughter. I imagine imagine your father was a very different teacher than he was as a father, or maybe.
No, he was pretty much. Well, I'll tell you a story about my dad in grade 6. And so, by grade 6,
At the
kids are
overall,
pretty
gonna give you
noisy
some
and
basic
horrible.
code,
And
yeah.
the
they get
pain
really bad in
chain,
grade 7. But
some
by
basic
grade 6,
matrix.
they're already
It's
pretty
way
bad.
too heavy. Strong force, weak force.
My
Right?
homeroom
In
teacher
every
was not
page
my
are
dad.
multiple sets of how you
he was the
have to
my
mechanically
homeroom
look at it
teacher
here.
was
If
the
it was
principal. My
this,
dad taught
it would
math.
follow binary
And
trees.
For at least
Beta
10
U,
minutes
beta V,
before he
hit the
walked in to
max,
teach our math
take another
class,
set
no one said
algebraically,
anything.
X, Y, Z.
They were
You can
quiet.
do the power of
Yeah, my dad was not someone you messed
M1,
around with.
M2,
And he was like that at
or
home too.
whatever
Like he's a
math,
tough guy, my
hack
dad. And
backwards to flip.
and he's a good
AX,
teacher. He's a very good teacher. He
XA.
taught me to read when I was very young and
the
spent
whole
a tremendous amount of
process
time
of
with me. But he was not
manifolding
someone
that
you
system
trifled with lightly. And all the kids knew that.
are two different
He had that
game
kind of
gamuts,
authority
some
that's
standard
rare,
models
actually,
that,
but necessary
like I
for
said,
teachers.
okay, this is
he
very
didn't really
small,
have
but it is
to
a
ever
useful
resort
tool
to any kind of
if I
discipline
needed
other than
the
that
numbers,
underlying
the
threat
symbol,
of absolute
the-
mayhem
the
that was
weight and
there
the
all the
mass,
time. And so,
as much as
and so that had some
subperiodic
trouble for
table
me
in a
because some of
matrix,
this kids
that
didn't really like him.
X or A
Even though they
one,
respected
X
them, and now and then they
prime
took
or
that
one,
out on me.
depending on how
But,
you're teaching it,
whatever.
what step.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things that happen when you're a kid.
Yeah, character. It's all character building, and as we'll talk about, both you and I agree that some
Just
bad
code to
things
me.
happening is an important part of your life.
Sitting in Delhi,
and
counting
that
at the
you should be
table with the
shielded
camera
from it.
over me,
Did-
I could
did-
I could write this out,
So
and
did
any
your
code you
dad sort
make
of
could still
practice,
be
tough love?
uncrackable
I mean,
between me
because I
and
kind
the
of,
inmates.
that's sort of in some sense.
Even if the guard
one
watched
gets
me
the
do it,
sense that
He didn't suffer fools gladly.
you could randomly do it,
You know,
and there's
so
still
yes, I would say he
heavier
did do that.
sequences
He had
under
very
local
high
keys
high
that would crack
standards,
it
and,
different. And math
although he's
being
also
the dreamer's limit.
extremely good with little kids. My dad
Wow.
really had a great hand with kids from say,
Yeah,
2
revolver.
to 12. He wasn't so fond of teenagers, and you can
is?
understand why. Well, yes. But he's great with little kids. He's still alive, and he was great with my kids too.
oh, that's great.
And so
Passing through the neighborhood.
I don't know.
Like
He has
the
this
local
genuine,
neighborhood has
unbelievably genuine
net
love
of
for little
jobs that are
kids.
realistic
and
as
it's a cool thing to
psychologists.
see in
It's a
someone
real
who's so fundamentally
metaphysics
tough. My
from
dad's
the
a hunter
overhead.
and a trapper
Let you zoom,
and
Peloton,
sharpshooter and
workout, MP, PT test,
canoer and
NP,
so
MP, PT
Did
test.
he
he's
take
the sort of
you
guy who
hunting? Did he
yeah,
take you hunting?
yeah.
Trapping?
I was
I'm
too
good with it, and I
soft-hearted
notice
really
that they're
to
not
hunt. I
on
did
the
trap with them, but
calculus.
even that, because I'm
And then obviously
temperamentally
women,
I'm very high in compassion, and
parents,
so
structural.
that sort of thing was
if
hard
it
on
is
me. We didn't
this, it's
see
probably
exactly eye to eye
work-related
temperamentally there.
in terms
He
of
taught me to
those
shoot. I can shoot pretty well, not as well as him.
businesses
He was a
that, what are they
provincial level,
doing? What are they
shooter.
worth?
And
What's
our house was
pulling
full of
across
guns. It's
for
like
you as
400
boss?
rifles
Like,
and
Yeah. My
So-
wife's father was like that. He taught her how to. She had guns
Well,
from the time she was young. He taught her how to shoot and how to take care of them.
well, like I
responsibly.
said, these are
and I guess
guys that
she went
usually have
shooting with
to
different ducks, but she
deal with
drew
it.
the line.
AR
She didn't wanna
670-1.
do
This is the
couldn't
groom
do that.
policy board
Did- did-
presentations
do you think-
for STEM general
that
resumes.
influence of that tough love.
These
I
are the
mean,
big
when I
ones.
hear
You'll
in
make
some
something
sense,
specific.
even
This is
before
a
I
heavy
knew
hitter
much
for
about
STEM
you,
millennium math
I knew
problems.
of, in some sense, you were preaching
$1
tough love.
million
in a
dollar
way,
math problems,
man
except
up.
for it rose
Basically,
$5,000.
get over it. Get over it. And
Oh,
just
it's the
move
general-
on.
Well,
Do you
it's
think-
not really
Into the
true.
general depth.
What I was
It's gonna
pointing
be
out
the
more was the
FMA,
danger
the
of
rabbit
regarding
trap,
yourself as a
Mario
victim. And
Builder,
a lot of that
ladder climb, playing
was
the game,
influenced by my
land
reading
nav,
of Freud.
sonar,
In particular, because
combative,
Freud was
holding
very
their
concerned
superiority.
about the pathology
Um,
of the devouring mother,
but-
and you see that in Jung as well. But Freud really came
Kinda
up with that
E stuff
insight to
goes in the
begin with,
desk.
and that an excess of compassion is destructive. And I see that manifesting itself in victim mentality and what
try
that
to
does to
build
people. And I also see it
some
as a
alien
manifestation
spacecraft. You know,
of
you
the
take a kid for a
female
ride for the
proclivity towards
patent,
authoritarianism.
application,
Now, it's funny to think of that as a
and
manifestation
assembly
of compassion, but we don't know
of
much about
chairs
female
with
political
degrees
pathology, right? Because females haven't been involved
for
in
small
the
business
political
invention
sphere for
forums,
that
STEM
long.
resumes,
But to
In the
think
modern
that
world,
there's
in the ancient world, they
well,
were.
exactly. Yes. But to think that
And you
there's
get into
no
something like this, and you
tilt
could put it
towards
with a chemistry
pathology
set,
that's
let's
specifically
say,
feminine is
and continue
well, that's
that
naive. It's foolish, and
silica
to not
here,
think that
NP
an
problem,
excess
Bluestone
of
militia.
compassion can be a catastrophe is to be blind. And the Freudians were very.
Conducts the
I
energy
think it's a quote from Freud, or at
slowly,
least one of his
obviously,
astute followers, that the good
to the
mother
firefly,
necessarily
obviously, yeah.
fails.
General
And so,
relativity,
what I
snowflake,
see-
special relativity.
So it's not so much tough love, I
index
would say, is
on,
that
again, where you're bouncing around
the
with
proper balance for a
how
child is
that
something like
square
an embrace,
might work.
right? That's the maternal embrace, and that's
And
absolutely
so
necessary.
by designing
and
those limits and
encouragement
saying, all
to
right, kid,
transform,
the first thing I'm going to
and
do is
that's
you're
more
going to
the
hit me with this
paternal
wrong.
territory. Now, both parents can play a role in those
Sigma.
two territories.
Okay, fine.
speaking more symbolically
We've heard
in
this
some
before.
sense. But, you know, women are tilted towards compassion.
I mean,
temperamentally, they're
given
higher in trait
the
compassion than
Pharaoh
men
and
on
the river
average.
denial, that
There's
polarizing
individual
wave
variability
function,
that's quite
Sure.
substantial.
on
But
a
variability. My wife is more encourages.
spin direction
encouraging of-
that
of
condenses a
transformation,
lot of
and
those things. Like I said,
Well,
there's
she's also probably
a
more
lot going on.
compassionate
Well,
than me. She's
a
probably
bit of
couple traits
combinations
more
of
than me.
things. I wanted it
yeah,
to
well,
be
I'm
those things. I was
at least in
working a
terms
lot
of
of
agreeableness, I'm probably negative emotion. I have quite a
hardscape,
feminine temperament, and so I'm probably more agreeable than